Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jim Braude. She is Margery. And so when was the last time you were part of a group decision? Did you leave relieved only because it was over? Did you leave frustrated because you'd just been a silent bystander to a really bad decision-making process? Did you leave on a groupthink high only to crash later when it became clear the decision that your team came to was a bad one? In the world of whiteboards, epic brainstorming sessions, conference calls, group decisions have become the norm, but they also perpetuate some of our worst instincts. How to smarten up and sidestep the perils of collective decision-making is the subject of a great new book. It's called Wiser, Getting Beyond Groupthink to Make Groups Smarter. It's by Cass Sunstein and Reid Hastie. Cass served as an administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs in the Obama administration. He's currently the Robert Walmsley University professor at Harvard Law School. Hey, Cass.
Hey, great to be here.
Great to see you.
Okay, well, until I read this book, I never thought about the fact that I've been a silent bystander a million times as people all around me made bad decisions, and I was too afraid to say I thought maybe that wasn't a good idea. But give us an example of what you're talking about so people can see this concretely.
Well, a famous one was when President Kennedy went into Cuba in the Bay of Pigs, when a lot of his advisors in the room thought this is a terrible mistake, it's going to be a disaster. It actually was a disaster, a foreign relations terribleness. And people said afterwards, well, President Kennedy said afterwards, how could I have been so stupid as to let them go ahead? And the advisors said afterwards, why didn't we speak up? That was a classic example of groupthink.
And the reason that people don't speak up is why?
There are a couple different reasons. One is if you are in a group of people who seem inclined to go into an invasion or to launch a product or to take some course of action, if they seem to think that, then you might think to yourself, they're probably right. And if I said something, it would just create pointless time suck. The other thing you might think is if you speak up in a way that's contrary to the prevailing view, the other people in the room are going to kind of look at you like you're dumb or not on the team, and that can be a pretty good impediment to speaking out.
It's also pretty intimidating, I should say. If you're with peers or with people who are your superiors, at least on a titular chain, it's pretty tough. You did some experimentation. You looked at these things, and not only is groupthink potentially a problem, you contend that when groups get together, their initial wrong-headed positions can get even hardened. Fill us in on the research you did.
Well, we've done a bunch of different things. In Colorado, we got some liberals in Boulder together to talk about climate change and affirmative action and same-sex civil unions. And before they talked, they were pretty mixed in their views. They were left to center, but there was some diversity in their views. After they talked to each other just briefly, their anonymous statements were far to the left and far more unified than they were before they talked. This happened on the left. We happened to do the same thing in another place in Colorado, that's Colorado Springs, where they tend to be pretty conservative, and they went shot to the right, so much so that their internal disagreements, as expressed in their anonymous statements before they talked, got washed out, and their anonymous statements after they talked were uniform and to the right.
And what was your analysis after the fact of that horrible two sets of outcomes? Is it because the loudest voices are the most extreme voices, or what is it?
No, not always that, though sometimes that. I've actually seen some of the tapes. We tape the conversations. What you could see happening in real time, and I think this is happening all over the world in countries that are extreme, that have religious extremism, as well as in countries that are democratic and just kind of polarized. What happens is if you are talking to people who seem to think something like climate change isn't a problem, I'll give that example, then you start to think to yourself, well, if I think climate change is a problem, I'm probably mistaken. And as that discussion continues, the number of arguments in this group, which doesn't think climate change is a problem, will be dominant in the direction of climate change isn't a problem. So even if the most extreme people aren't the loudest and the most confident, it's just that's the weight of opinion in the group. And even if you don't care about your reputation, as you said, it can be intimidating to speak out. Even if you didn't have that as part of your mental set, the fact that most people in the group are saying climate change isn't a problem makes you think, well, probably isn't. I agree with them.
But you know what I thought was so upsetting is that when people were presented with facts contrary to what they thought, it didn't matter.
That is very important and alarming. I agree with you. But it happens only in a restricted set of cases. So I want to emphasize the cases where it does happen, but not go to town with the finding. The set of cases where it happens is if you have a really strongly entrenched view, and then you hear someone saying the other thing based on facts, you're likely to either get your back up and say, I'm going to fight hard for my view and just treat that person as someone who can't do even basic arithmetic. Or you might think, why would they disagree with me if I weren't right? That's kind of a clue that I'm right. And this does happen if you think very strongly, for example, that a recent president is terrible. And then you're presented some facts showing that on something you care about, the recent president was actually pretty good. People aren't going to be persuaded by that unless they have a lot of time or unless they have really credible people supporting the contrary view rather than someone who predictably supports the contrary view who they can discount.
So this is Cass Sunstein from Harvard basically saying you should stay locked in your house all day long. Now, Cass,
during a snowstorm.
Now, Cass, the perfect example of this, and I know it's pathetically obvious, but we should get into it since we're in the media business. You're describing the audience of MSNBC and MSNBC, the audience of Fox, and Fox Broadcast. Isn't that essentially what's happening? You go there because you agree with what they say, and you get yourself worked into even a greater frenzy about the message after you've, quote, talked to them and listened to them, right?
Completely. So that's a great point. And as we get a more fragmented communications universe, the phenomenon I'm describing, ideological amplification, gets more common. And we actually have evidence, very recent evidence, that Fox News and MSNBC can move voters non-trivially, that the presence of Fox News can have real effects on a presidential election. And the same is less true, but it is true for MSNBC.
Thank you, Cass Sunstein, for saying that, because that's been my argument that you keep poo-pooing all
What?
the time.
There what?
That Fox News has been incredibly powerful in terms of setting debate among people that tend to lean a little bit to the right in the first place. But and by the way, the name of the book by Cass Sunstein and Reid Hastie is Wiser, Getting Beyond Groupthink to Make Groups Smarter. You talked about something that I said to Jim reminded me so much of seeing Colin Powell on television talking about the Iraq War, because we were talking before about how if you're set in your position on the right, you're set in the position on the left, that the facts may not sway you, but a person of good reputation that people think very well of could sway you. And I remember thinking when I saw Colin Powell, whom I thought a lot of, he's a general, seemed like an honest guy. Well, if he thinks they're weapons of mass destruction, maybe he's right, and that can happen a lot.
Completely. So there's evidence that groups in business and government can do better than the discussion thus far has suggested if they are listening to people who have diverse views. And as you say, if one of the people who has diverse views has credibility within that group, that person can move the group. So there's terrific evidence that if you have a bunch of people who are maybe interested in doing recreational drugs, if they have someone who actually struggled with drug addiction who said, don't get started with this, that person has credibility within that group. Where if it's someone who's never had an issue, never thought about drugs, that person can be, that person just doesn't matter to me. So the technical word sometimes used for it, it's not the best word in the world, but it is revealing, I think, is the surprising validator. And for people who think that Colin Powell is really reliable, who maybe didn't think the Bush administration was, he was kind of a surprising validator.
Yes.
And that's what a lot of good communications outfits try to do. They try to do, if you're trying to push a product, someone who you wouldn't think would really like that particular product says, this is the one for you.
Okay, we talked about the Bush administration, Cass Sunstein. We talked about the Kennedy administration. Let's talk about the one you served in. Is groupthink prevalent in the Obama administration?
Whatever you think of the Obama administration, the president sets a really excellent tone of, I want to hear the point of view that I haven't heard yet. So I'll tell you a little story. There was a meeting early on during the economic crisis where at the end of the meeting, the youngest person in the room, the lowest status person in the room, spoke. And
With the president in the room?
With the president in the room. And he made a kind of mistake. There was some acronym he didn't get right. And as government goes, it was actually funny. So the whole room broke out in laughter that the guy had made this terrible mistake, and everyone started to walk out of the room. This was in the Roosevelt room. So it was a very important room, probably next to the Oval, the most important room. And the president said, as everyone was laughing and walking out of the room, said, "Wait, hold on now. Let him make his point." And that's kind of typical of the president. It was a courteous thing to do, but what he really wanted to do was hear a point he hadn't heard yet. So his attitude, which is, I think, true of good Republican and Democratic leaders of all kinds, is not tell me why I'm right, but tell me why I might be missing something and let me know how things could go wrong. On the kind of a famous thing that did go wrong, that is the website for healthcare.gov, there was not an ideal, needless to say, system in place. And the person who came in to fix it, the person the president chose to fix it, is one of the heroes of my book. That is a guy named Jeff Zients, who's not a particularly ideological person. He's a fantastic manager. And partly what makes him a fantastic manager, and he's a very important person in the Obama administration, is that he's always thinking, what's the other side? How can things go wrong? What might Republicans think that I'm not picking up on? What might just people are anxious about government performance think that I'm not picking up on? And you may have noticed healthcare.gov is now working, and that's because we got a manager who is really good at that sort of thing.
Well, I thought it was fascinating the way you characterized sort of the happy, complacent, easygoing people that tend to be more of the happy talkers versus the more anxious, look behind every, like the chess player that's looking, 17 moves ahead, because it does. When you think of situations you've been in your own life or your own office, as you said before, it's not that easy to be that person that's looking 17 moves ahead.
Yes, and in my office, I had an office of about 50 people. It was in the White House. It had a significant role, has a significant role in American government. I learned early on that I should silence myself and get those 50 people whose politics, who knows, who cares. They're just really good civil servants to tell me things that maybe I didn't want to hear. So they are civil servants who are really good policy analysts, and part of what they do is signal their own anxiety about, not like they need to take the day off, but like they think that a policy might be going wrong. And to welcome that this might be going wrong, so long as it's not just a despairing person, so long as it's someone who's trying to bring new good information to light, that's very important within government. It's also really important within companies. A lot of America's most successful companies they don't want happy talk until they're right at the stage when nothing can be done to make things better. Then it's okay to be happy.
Happy talk, it just occurred to me as part of that joinder agreement Marty Walsh signed, the United States Olympic Committee. It just occurred to me. There are many depressing things in this book, but also you get, that's not a great way to sell the book. But the good news is, we'll get to in a minute, you have a list of things which you think can sort of break the logjam. One of the most depressing things to me that is not news is how immune to facts many opinions are. A colleague of yours, well, not at the law school, but at Harvard School of Public Health, Bob Blendon, does all this polling on healthcare things. And I was at a thing with him a couple of months ago where he said the public approval and disapproval of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is exactly today where it was a month after it was introduced by the President of the United States, or a month after it passed, or some such thing. I don't make that point to say I wish more people supported it. I wish more people either didn't support it or did support it. But the notion is people get so locked into their opinions, and then it's so reinforced by your concept, this groupthink thing, that it's almost impenetrable.
Yes. So I'll get to the bad news and the depressing stuff in a moment, but let's start with happy talk. And the happy talk will be about a lack of happy talk in the sense that there are companies all over the United States. Some of them are small and in really local areas that have prospered over the last years. And the reason is that someone has a good idea and they work with other people who don't just say, they might also say, but they don't just say, that's great, let's do it. They say, how are we going to implement that? And if you look at the successes in the American economy over, let's say, the past 50 years, let alone the past 5. There are businesses, there are universities, there are nonprofits. We're the envy of the world in the sense that we not only have creative people, but we have a culture which sees that a way of being a good team member is not to say hooray for you, but is to say, like the beloved New England Patriots, let's work together and bring to bear the knowledge we have to try to figure out how to make this work. And if you look at the successes of Republican and Democratic governors, let's say, over the past 5 years, and there are a lot of them, it's because they have aggregated the information each other's has. They haven't thought, I'm left of center, I want these things, I'm right of center, there, I want those things, and then march off. In terms of the tough stuff, if people have an ingrained ideological commitment, as some people do on some issues, then to get them to move off the dime is really rough. And it's understandable, because you won't move off the dime on something you really care about, because first you have a strong emotional investment in it. It's like if someone says your kid, something bad about your child, that's just going to make you mad at them. That's not going to make you ordinarily think my child is bad. And also, if you think something strongly on a political or other issue, you've really thought that through. So if on healthcare you're committed to thinking it's great or it's horrible, then that's part of something you feel
you're invested in it.
You're invested in it. But that is a problem, and a lot of the book is about how to overcome that problem. But I want to localize it, meaning saying that most Americans most of the time don't think that policy issues or issues relating to their job are going to have the same emotional inflection as their children.
So give us a couple of examples, Cass Sunstein, about how real-world examples, achievable examples of way people can break through this groupthink dilemma, for lack of a better expression. What do you do?
Okay, here are 3 ideas that seem to work pretty well. One is, if leaders in a group are quiet at the beginning, that can be very helpful at inculcating a culture of talking and of feeling, if you have information to add, it's invited. So you said, great point, that it's often intimidating. I worked in the White House. That's occasionally an intimidating place, especially if the president's there. And so to speak out there, people are sometimes cautious. But if the leader is self-silencing at the beginning and says, look, I'm inclined to do this, or I don't even have an inclination yet, or I'm not going to tell you, then that can be really effective at getting a lot of conversation going. Steve Jobs is a very strong-willed person, but he was a master, really, of using talent, partly because he didn't suppress talent. A second thing you can do that's really great, and it can be done informally or more formally, is to say, each person in this group has a role. So your role, for example, is to think about communications. Your role is to think about engineering. Your role is to think about technology. And then if whatever their expertise is for a task, they have 3 different roles, then they're less likely to think, I'm going to shut up. Because if they do, then you're not going to hear about engineering or technology or communications. The third thing I think is very simple, and the best kind of nonprofits and a lot of the best educational institutions, high schools, private schools, public schools do this, is they give a signal about what it means to be a team player, where the damaging signal is a team player is one who goes along with the group and doesn't cause any trouble. That's the bad one. The good team player, the good conception of a team player, is one who adds information that the group lacks. And if you can create a culture where a team player is understood as someone who adds information, that can be great for morale, but at least as important, maybe more important, it can be great for the group's ultimate decisions.
Sound good to me. Can you stick around a couple of minutes?
Delighted.
We'll take a couple of calls. We're talking to Cass Sunstein, who is the author of Wiser, Getting Beyond Groupthink to Make Groups Smarter.
Yeah, we're going to take your calls at 877-301-8970. After a quick break, we'll ask you about your office and the Happy Talk people in your company. Up next, 877-301-8970.
We're going to take some questions from you. Have you ever experienced the hazards of Happy Talk and groupthink? What have you done about it? Or do you want advice from Cass Sunstein as to how to break that logjam? Give us a buzz, 877-301-8970. Let's go right to the phones. Tim from Providence, you're on with Cass Sunstein on Boston Public Radio. Hey, Tim.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Pleasure.
I just wanted to ask Beyonce, he has any thoughts or ideas about groups.
Hey, Tim, we're going to have to put you on hold for about 1 second, and maybe we'll get a better connection because we can hardly hear you, but we'll get back to you. Don't go away. Put you on hold. Were you ever? I mean, you have a pretty strong resume. I think we'd agree. Were you ever intimidated in those meetings with Barack Obama? Did you feel free to say what you were actually thinking?
In the White House, if you're in a meeting with the president, I've happened to have known him for a long time.
Yeah.
I taught with him at the University of Chicago. But if he's the president of the United States, you don't feel as comfortable as you do, let's say, in a restaurant over dinner. But it's not just the president. The people in the White House, of various sorts, whatever their resumes look like, and they're typically pretty good, it's the White House.
Yes.
So, of course, you don't feel as at ease as you would at home.
You feel pretty free to talk here, though, don't you? I'm kidding.
No, I'm
okay.
really
But I also
scared. I'm really
Mike,
scared.
We didn't get into this much, but I think it's harder for women, too.
Well, there's some great data suggesting that a good predictor of whether a group is going to make decisions well is whether the group has women on it.
And whether the women dare to say something in that group.
Yes, that too.
Okay.
But this is recent evidence
That's
suggesting
great.
that women's presence is actually helpful for better group judgments.
Let's go to back to Providence. Apparently, Tim is on a good line. Tim, welcome to Boston Public Radio yet again. Hi, Tim.
Hi, thanks.
Pleasure.
I just was wondering if the author has any thoughts on Japanese culture in where if you're a student in a classroom in Japan and you don't understand, anything like a math equation, everyone stops what they're doing and makes sure you understand it before the group moves on. So I'm wondering if he has any thoughts about the good side of that. And here in the United States, we're not really encouraged to help along, our fellow, colleagues or friends. It's kind of more, we're encouraged to be independent and have our own ideas. And it's different in other countries. I'm wondering if he has any thoughts on
Great
that.
question, Tim. Thank you. Cass?
Well, I think I'd make a distinction between two different tasks. One task is to make sure a group makes good decisions, and their big goal is to make sure that everybody who has something to add gets to add what they have to add. Now, if you have someone in the room who doesn't understand the topic at all, let's say it's a scientific topic and the person is a lawyer who doesn't know a lot about science, then it's probably good not to teach the lawyer science on the spot, but to ask the lawyer law questions. Then there's a separate issue, which is how do you do best in a classroom with people who are at different levels of understanding, and to make sure that the person who's not getting it yet does get it. That can be pretty good teaching.
Let's stay in Rhode Island, where Mike is on the phone with Cass Sunstein. He's the author of Wiser, Getting Beyond Groupthink to Make Groups Smarter. Hey there, Mike.
Hello, folks.
Hi.
Thank you very much for taking this call. My observation, listening to this stimulating conversation between yourselves, it takes immense humility to be able to seek the opinion of others, even another person. What a privilege to have a group of people thinking about the same thing and getting those unselfish, hopefully, perspectives from everybody. I don't have much more to say on that, but I just wanted to reinforce the fact that the humility and the grace it takes to seek the opinions of others.
That was great,
It's
Mike.
wonderful.
That's true.
Thanks.
That's
Cass?
true.
Yeah, thanks for that. I can tell you a little story, which is when I was in the White House, I testified before Congress numerous times. And when the House went Republican in 2010, one of the first hearings I was invited to participate in was before Chairman Issa. And I thought to myself, he got elected. I didn't. He's the important chair of an important committee. I'm not. And it's kind of natural, I think, to feel pretty humble if you're invited to speak before a chair of a committee, even if the person is of a different political party. And I was fortunate to be able to work very well with people in the Republican Party. And I think it's partly because I had the natural sense, which I think is human, that they're going to know a lot of things that I don't.
Thanks for the call, Mike.
We don't have much time left, Cass, but I wondered, why do managers do this thing where they say, everything is wonderful, everybody's terrific, you're great, you're great, you're great, you're great, and the rest of people are sitting there saying, no, we're not, but the manager keeps saying everybody's great. What's the point of that?
It can be morale building. So for a manager to give a sense that the people on the team are excellent, that, if it's sincere and credible, can
Yeah.
be really helpful. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a very good manager as president, partly because he told different people who had radically different points of view, you're on the right track, I agree with you. And that got them all to develop their different points of view. And then he'd come to a meeting and side with one and not with the others. And that could kind of crush them. But the next day he'd say again, you're terrific.
We talked about groupthink in politics. While one would assume that there should be no place where there would be less groupthink than in academia, books like Shadow University, Harvey Silverglade's piece, and actually a lot of the focus, not in his book, but in discussions, is place where you work, Harvard Law School. How bad is groupthink? I know it's hard to generalize in academia.
That's a great question. I taught at the University of Chicago for a number of years, and what I saw was at Chicago, I'll get to Harvard in a moment, that all comers are completely welcome. And so there wasn't any left-wing orthodoxy at all, and that's great. Harvard Law School, where I now work, is actually exactly the same.
Really?
There are a bunch of people there who were worked in Republican administrations or sympathized with Republican administrations. Harvard's kind of famously not right of center, but Harvard Law School, now diversity is completely welcome. I'm told that was not true 20 years ago, and I certainly have visited universities. I won't embarrass anybody and name names, but I think there is a problem in American universities, at least in some departments, where if you're not left of center, you're not that welcome.
Cass Sunstein, this is great. Thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.